The first clues. Miss Marple stepped quietly into the village hall, her keen eyes sweeping over the gathered crowd. The room, warm and fragrant with the scent of roasted chestnuts and mulled cider, was alive with chatter, yet a peculiar tension seemed to ripple beneath the surface. She noticed small details that most would overlook: a guest fidgeting with a cufflink, another adjusting the edge of a scarf with a nervous twitch, and the deliberate avoidance of certain glances exchanged across the room. The familiar rhythm of village gatherings was there, but something felt askew, as if a note of unease had quietly settled over the festive cheer. Near the centre of the hall, a small commotion had drawn a cluster of curious onlookers. Miss Marple approached discreetly, finding Mr. Hawthorne lying on the polished wooden floor, his face pale beneath the flickering light of the chandelier. A wealthy collector, known both for his extensive knowledge of rare antiques and his fiery temper, he had always commanded attention wherever he went. Now, unconscious and unmoving, he presented a stark contrast to the usual vitality that accompanied his presence. Villagers murmured in speculation, offering whispered theories that ranged from a sudden fainting spell to more sinister possibilities. No one seemed to know exactly what had caused this abrupt fall from his usual robust demeanour. As the villagers circled, Miss Marple remained at the edge of the gathering, observing quietly. She noted the subtle reactions of those closest to Mr. Hawthorne. Mrs. Pembroke, with her knitting needles paused mid-stitch, looked unusually pale, while Mr. Greaves shifted uneasily from one foot to the other, avoiding eye contact with anyone who approached. A young woman near the refreshment table dabbed at her lips with a napkin, her fingers trembling slightly. Even the hall's ever-cheerful caretaker, who usually welcomed everyone with a warm smile, seemed restrained, as though aware of something unspoken. Each movement, each glance, each suppressed sigh added a layer of intrigue that only Miss Marple's practised eye could fully appreciate. Her gaze drifted to the small table near the entrance, where a forgotten envelope lay, partly hidden under a stack of programs for the evening's festivities. The envelope, slightly creased as though it had been dropped in haste, bore the elegant handwriting of a local resident, one who had once held a quarrel with Mr. Hawthorne. Miss Marple bent slightly, noting the careful placement of the envelope and the faint smudge on its corner, evidence perhaps of hurried hands or nervous fingers. She did not move it, but committed the detail to memory, understanding that even such a small object could carry weight in unravelling the mystery before her. As she continued her quiet observations, snippets of conversation reached her ears. "I didn't think he'd attend this year," murmured one guest, a hint of worry in her voice. Another added under his breath, "It must be the excitement." Or perhaps the argument earlier this week. Miss Marple listened, connecting these seemingly random remarks, aware that even casual words often concealed more than they revealed. The villagers, caught between concern and curiosity, had already begun to speculate, each theory more elaborate than the last. Yet none touched on the true cause. With each passing moment, the cosy warmth of the hall felt tinged with a subtle tension, a reminder that appearances could be deceptive. Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and sharp perception, knew that the first clues were rarely dramatic. They were hidden in gestures, in hesitations, in the unnoticed exchange of glances, and in the discarded envelope that might reveal more than anyone suspected. She moved to the edge of the hall, ready to follow the threads of observation that would slowly unravel the truth, knowing that in this room full of familiar faces, anyone might hold the key to the evening's unsettling mystery. Miss Marple moved quietly among the villagers, her presence understated yet attentive. She asked gentle, seemingly casual questions, careful not to alarm anyone or draw undue attention. "Did you notice if Mr. Hawthorne seemed unwell earlier?" she inquired softly, her voice blending with the murmur of conversation and the faint crackle of the fireplace. The responses she received were polite, though inconsistent. One guest insisted he had been perfectly fine just moments before, while another claimed he seemed distracted, almost agitated, yet neither could provide a clear reason for his sudden collapse. Miss Marple noted each slight contradiction, filing away details that might later coalesce into understanding. The hall itself offered a subtle story of its own. Garlands of holly twisted gracefully along the banisters, their green leaves and crimson berries catching the flickering light. Candles in brass holders dotted the tables, casting soft, dancing shadows across the polished wood. Platters of mince pies, spiced nuts, and slices of fruitcake were arranged with careful symmetry, though a few crumbs and a slightly askew plate suggested someone had lingered longer than etiquette demanded. Even the placement of chairs seemed telling. A cluster near the hearth was noticeably emptier than usual, as if the occupants had found reason to avoid the centre of attention. Miss Marple absorbed these details as naturally as she might breathe, knowing that in a room of familiar faces, the smallest deviations often hinted at the most. Her attention was drawn to a quiet exchange between two guests near the side table. Mr. Greaves, who had been unusually uneasy since Mr. Hawthorne's collapse, leaned toward Mrs. Pembroke, speaking in hushed tones while casting furtive glances around the hall. Mrs. Pembroke's fingers toyed nervously with her shawl, her expression tightening as she responded. Though the words were lost to the murmur of the crowd, Miss Marple could see the rhythm of suspicion and secrecy in their gestures. There was a tension there, subtle yet unmistakable, suggesting that these interactions might conceal more than mere concern for the fallen guest. Throughout the hall, other villagers whispered theories, their voices blending into the gentle hum of holiday cheer. A child tugged at a parent's sleeve, momentarily breaking the spell of worry, only to return to their games with renewed curiosity. Miss Marple observed it all with calm patience, allowing the cosy warmth of the hall to contrast with the undercurrent of unease. Every glance, every whispered comment, and every careful step became part of the puzzle, each one a thread she might later weave into the larger picture. By the time she returned to her vantage near the hearth, Miss Marple's mind was quietly assembling a map of suspicions, subtle contradictions, and carefully hidden motives. The villagers' outward cheer had begun to reveal its layered nuances, and she understood that beneath the laughter and festive aroma, the first true hints of the mystery's resolution were already taking shape. Chapter 2: Secrets in the Snow. Morning arrived quietly over the village, soft pale light reflecting off a thick blanket of freshly fallen snow. The hall's windows were frosted along the edges, delicate patterns like lace etched by the night's chill. Outside, the world appeared still and peaceful, yet a closer look revealed signs that the calm was only a surface impression. Footprints crisscrossed the snow around the hall, some deep and deliberate, others faint and hurried. A few tracks overlapped in curious patterns, as if more than one person had passed this way at nearly the same moment. Miss Marple studied them carefully, noting not just the direction, but the pressure of each step, the way the snow had shifted under weight, and the subtle scuffs that suggested someone had paused or retraced their route. The villagers had already begun to gather near the entrance, their breath puffing in small clouds. Soft murmurs carried snippets of speculation, delicate as the frost on the rooftops. "Do you see who left these tracks?" one asked, voice tinged with curiosity rather than alarm. Another offered, perhaps it was just a friend helping him last night, or someone with more complicated intentions. Miss Marple listened, letting the words drift through her mind while she continued her quiet inspection of the ground. Footprints alone did not reveal the whole story, but, in combination with the murmured clues from the villagers, patterns began to emerge. She wandered down the lane that ran past the hall, observing footprints leading toward the old stone bridge, then returning along a narrower path toward the cottages, the snow-muffled sound lending the morning a serene, almost meditative quality, while each delicate crunch of her own steps seemed to mark the rhythm of discovery. Along the way, villagers emerged from their homes to greet the day, offering brief, cryptic remarks. One elderly resident whispered of a long-standing rivalry between two families, hinting at old grudges that might explain sudden tensions. Another mentioned a discreet courtship that had ended poorly, a quiet heartbreak that had been spoken of only in passing at previous gatherings. Miss Marple noted each detail, realizing that the frozen landscape held more than beauty. It contained traces of relationships, concealed emotions, and unspoken motives. The pristine snow, with its delicate sparkle in the morning sun, contrasted sharply with the layered intricacies of human behavior she was quietly piecing together. A few stray twigs caught in footprints suggested hurried movements, as if someone had wanted to obscure their path, or perhaps had been interrupted mid-journey. By the time she returned to the hall, her mind had begun to assemble the threads connecting the night's mysterious incident with the day's unfolding patterns. The village, wrapped in soft white snow, remained charming and tranquil, yet Miss Marple could sense the undercurrent of secrets pressing gently against the surface. Each footprint, each whispered hint, was a small invitation to curiosity, a subtle nudge that the mystery had only begun to reveal itself. Even in this quiet morning, the story was moving forward, step by careful step. The small envelope that had been carelessly dropped during the evening now lay on the edge of a polished sideboard, half hidden beneath a festive garland. Miss Marple approached it with the same quiet attentiveness that guided her through every subtle clue. The hall was calm, yet a tension lingered in the corners of the room, carried in the nervous shifts of the villagers who circled at a discreet distance. No one dared touch the envelope. Its presence seemed to hold a quiet power, a silent promise of secrets yet to be revealed. Miss Marple crouched slightly, noting the faint crease along one corner, the small smudge that suggested hurried handling. She did not pick it up immediately, preferring first to observe the room. Her eyes swept over the guests, noting subtle reactions to the envelope's visibility. Mrs. Pembroke's knitting had paused mid-stitch, her fingers hovering uncertainly above the yarn, while Mr. Greaves glanced toward the table, then quickly looked away, as if fearing someone might notice his attention. Even the hall's younger attendants seemed drawn by an unconscious curiosity, peering toward the object before returning to their duties. Finally, Miss Marple allowed herself to lift the envelope, turning it gently in her hands. The weight was light, but the contents hinted at more than a mere note. She noticed the careful folding of the paper inside, the faint outline of writing that could be discerned even without opening it fully. It was a subtle sign, she thought, that someone had intended for this message to be found, or perhaps deliberately concealed until the right moment. The notion stirred a quiet intrigue in her mind. As she examined the envelope, snippets of conversation reached her ears, soft and urgent.
"I don't think he should have seen it," whispered one guest, voice low, almost fearful.
Another replied with a hint of frustration. It was meant to stay private. He had no right to interfere. Miss Marple observed the shifting glances, the tightening of hands around cups of tea, the small pauses that carried unspoken tension. The package, it seemed, had stirred more than curiosity. It had unearthed a dormant layer of anxiety and perhaps resentment. She carefully unfolded the paper inside. While the words were only partially revealed at first glance, the content hinted at transactions, disagreements, and claims of ownership, matters that might explain why Mr. Hawthorne had been the centre of attention in such an abrupt and unsettling way. Even the simplest phrasing suggested disputes that could provoke strong emotions, especially when wealth, reputation, or rare collectibles were involved. Miss Marple's mind worked quietly, connecting these hints with her earlier observations of nervous glances, furtive whispers, and subtle gestures. Across the hall, the tension began to ripple outward. A guest whispered urgently to another, who responded with a sharp shake of the head, while yet another seemed to hesitate, caught between curiosity and caution. Miss Marple could see how this small, innocuous object, the envelope and its carefully folded contents, had shifted the atmosphere. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest details carried the heaviest weight, and the simplest notes could provoke ripples far beyond their immediate presence. Setting the envelope aside once more, Miss Marple allowed herself a moment to step back and observe the room again. The hall retained its festive charm, the flickering candles and garlands of holly softening the edges of tension. Yet beneath the cosy exterior, currents of suspicion and quiet unease flowed, invisible but undeniable. The package, she realized, was more than a mere message. It was a key to understanding why Mr. Hawthorne had been targeted, a thread she would follow carefully, letting it unravel the mystery at its own measured pace. Chapter 3. Red Herrings and Rumours. The hall was alive with the soft crackle of roaring fires, their warmth spreading gently across the polished wooden floor and into the hearts of those gathered nearby. Villagers clustered in small groups, murmuring in low tones as if the heat of the flames encouraged confessions that might otherwise remain unspoken. Miss Marple sat quietly in a corner, her knitting untouched, her eyes following the subtle shifts of posture, the fleeting gestures, and the barely audible exchanges that carried more meaning than the words themselves. "She's always been sharp, hasn't she?" murmured one guest to another, glancing at Mrs. Pembroke as she moved past with her tray of mince pies. Another voice, hushed and careful, added, "I heard he had a disagreement with Mr. Hawthorne last month. Something about that new collection of coins he was acquiring." Miss Marple listened, her mind quietly noting the contrasts between statements. Some phrases seemed rehearsed, while others were tinged with genuine surprise, or perhaps with fear of being overheard. Patterns began to emerge, a silent map of tension beneath the cheerful chatter. Even the children, who had been playing near the hearth, added small threads to the tapestry of observation. One whispered an overheard fragment. "He shouted at her yesterday."
Didn't he?
Another repeated it to a friend, their wide eyes reflecting both curiosity and the thrill of secrecy. These snippets, insignificant on the surface, became pieces Miss Marple tucked carefully away, recognizing the truth often travelled in whispers. Disguised among the noise of ordinary life, rumours circulated with remarkable speed. Tales of past betrayals, of hidden debts long forgotten, and secret admirers who had never been noticed before, added layers of intrigue to the cosy scene. Villagers leaned closer to each other, sharing confidences that could easily mislead a casual listener, but revealed far more to someone trained in observation. Miss Marple's keen gaze caught subtle reactions, a faint blush, a tightened grip on a cup, a brief avoidance of another's glance. Each small movement carried weight, each unspoken pause suggested a story waiting to be uncovered. The warmth of the fires and the scent of roasted chestnuts lent the room an air of comfort, softening the sharp edges of the suspicions that lingered. Miss Marple could see that while the villagers spoke freely, their minds were occupied with half-told stories and selective memories. What was left unsaid often revealed more than what was spoken aloud. In this gentle, domestic environment, the seeds of misdirection were sown naturally, blending with the charm of the village and the festive glow of the evening. As the group settled slightly, lulled by the rhythmic hiss of the flames and the familiar comfort of familiar faces, Miss Marple allowed herself a quiet smile. The gossip, the whispered rumours, the hesitant confessions, all were valuable threads. They would lead her closer to the truth, even if they tangled at first in layers of misdirection. For the attentive observer, the cosy hearth was not just a place of warmth, but a vantage point from which secrets revealed themselves softly, subtly, and with a patience matched only by time itself. Miss Marple had just risen from her quiet corner near the hearth when a small commotion near the kitchen drew her attention. A maid, her hands trembling slightly, held out a fragment of paper, torn unevenly along one edge, as though it had been hastily ripped from a larger note. The flickering candlelight caught the faint ink on its surface, revealing a few jagged words that hinted at secrecy, though the meaning was far from clear. Miss Marple took the paper gently, allowing the warmth of the room to soothe the subtle tension that had begun to ripple through the hall. The hall itself remained comforting. The smell of freshly baked pastries mingled with the soft aroma of pine from the garlands adorning every doorway, and the low murmur of conversations created a background of gentle familiarity. Yet, even within this cozy setting, the discovery of the note introduced a quiet edge of suspense. Miss Marple examined it closely, her trained eye catching the angle of the tear, the smudge near the corner, and the faint impression of writing from the missing portion. It was clear to her that someone had attempted to conceal this message, perhaps fearing its contents would be discovered by an unsuspecting observer. As she carefully pieced together the fragment with other scraps she had noticed earlier, a story began to emerge in soft outlines. The note suggested a meeting, a disagreement, and a potential grievance that could involve Mr. Hawthorne. Miss Marple's mind raced not with alarm, but with curiosity. Each tiny clue, an errant word, a smudge, the crease in the paper, offered insight into the subtle dynamics between the villagers. Even the simplest observations, she knew, could reveal motives hidden beneath the surface of polite society. Around her, villagers whispered quietly, "Do you see this before?" One asked nervously, glancing toward another who shook her head, a flicker of unease in her eyes. Another added, almost sotto voce, "I thought it had been lost."
"I didn't think anyone would find it." Miss Marple listened with patience, noting the hesitation and careful choice of words.
These murmurs, though understated, carried meaning. People often revealed their fears and suspicions without realizing they were giving away hints to a keen observer. The flickering candles cast dancing shadows along the walls, illuminating the soft curves of holly decorations and the warm glow of polished wooden furniture. The cozy atmosphere served as a gentle counterpoint to the growing tension, wrapping the villagers and listeners alike in a sense of safety even as the mystery deepened. Miss Marple's calm presence acted as a quiet anchor, balancing intrigue with the familiar comfort of a room full of friends and neighbours, laughter occasionally peeking through in short bursts despite the unease. Slowly, she began to reconstruct the narrative concealed within the torn fragments, envisioning the likely sequence of events and the subtle intentions behind them. Each piece of the note, each whisper exchanged across the room, added to a delicate puzzle, revealing glimpses of human nature, pride, and caution. Miss Marple understood that the answer would not arrive with sudden drama. It would emerge gradually, carefully, much like the warmth of the fire melting frost outside. By the time she returned the note to a safe spot on the counter, Miss Marple had formed a clear sense of the story's edges, even if the full picture remained elusive. The villagers, sipping warm drinks and murmuring among themselves, were unaware of the quiet observations shaping the evening's understanding. And yet, in the interplay of shadows, whispers, and careful attention, the first threads of revelation were already beginning to weave themselves together, guiding Miss Marple and the audience ever closer to the truth. Chapter 4. Hidden Motives. Miss Marple took her seat at the long, candle-lit table, the polished surface gleaming in the flickering light. Plates of roast vegetables, golden brown hams, and steaming puddings were arranged with careful precision, each dish a testament to the festive care of the villagers. The aroma of spiced wine mingled with the scent of freshly baked bread, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort. Yet beneath the surface of this inviting scene, Miss Marple sensed the subtle currents of unspoken tension flowing among those gathered. Her eyes roamed over the guests, noting who sat near whom, and the spaces between chairs told stories all their own. Mr. Greaves, who had appeared so uneasy earlier, chose a seat at the far end, avoiding the direct line of sight of Mrs. Pembroke, whose sharp glance suggested a lingering grievance from years past. A young couple exchanged polite smiles, yet the faint tightening of their hands betrayed a worry neither voiced aloud. Miss Marple observed these nuances quietly, understanding that gestures often revealed more than words, and that the arrangement of a table could mirror the hidden alliances and rivalries of a community. The conversation ebbed and flowed like a gentle tide. "The ham is perfectly roasted this year," remarked one guest, but the words carried an undercurrent of comparison, an unspoken challenge to someone else at the table. Toasts were offered with cheerful warmth, yet even here subtle reactions appeared. A slight hesitation before lifting a glass, a fleeting frown at a comment intended to entertain. Miss Marple noticed each micro-expression, noting who appeared pleased, who forced a smile, and who remained guarded. These small details, though easily overlooked, were the very clues she had learned to value above all else. As the meal progressed, she also observed how the villagers interacted with the food itself. A hand lingered over a platter slightly longer than necessary. A second helping was accepted with visible reluctance. A napkin was folded carefully to conceal a note or perhaps a gesture of intention. Each movement became a piece of the puzzle, a subtle thread in a tapestry of hidden motives. Miss Marple's attention was constant yet unobtrusive, allowing her to gather insight without disrupting the natural rhythm of the gathering. Amid the laughter and the occasional clink of cutlery against china, the atmosphere retained its cozy charm, the warmth of the candles softening the edges of suspicion. Even so, the undercurrent of rivalry and careful observation created a quiet suspense that threaded through the room. Miss Marple knew that these gentle exchanges, these fleeting glances and unspoken acknowledgments would ultimately reveal more than any overt confession. Each dish, each toast, each subtle movement was an invitation to curiosity, drawing the careful observer closer to the truths that lay hidden beneath the cheerful surface of this festive meal. By the time the final course was served, Miss Marple had already begun piecing together the relationships, the tensions and the delicate interplay of personalities at the table. The cozy comfort of the candlelit hall remained intact, yet beneath it, the threads of mystery were slowly weaving themselves into a pattern she could discern, ready to guide her toward the answers she sought. After the last crumbs of dessert had been cleared, a small gift exchange began near the hearth, the glow of candlelight bouncing softly off polished ornaments and garlands. Miss Marple watched quietly as villagers reached into baskets, pulling out neatly wrapped packages and exchanging them with polite smiles. At first glance, the scene was a picture of festive cheer, but her trained eyes soon caught subtle irregularities. A delicate box wrapped in gold paper was returned unopened by its intended recipient, an unusual reaction in a village where such gestures were typically received with warmth. Another gift, a bottle of spiced cider, changed hands twice before settling with a guest who appeared visibly uncomfortable, a faint frown tugging at the corner of her lips. Miss Marple noted the hesitations, the brief, awkward pauses, and the way some hands lingered over packages as if deciding whether to reveal or conceal their contents. Each movement, though small, hinted at currents of tension beneath the cheerful ritual. Whispers passed along the circle.
"I didn't think she'd like that," one guest murmured, glancing around nervously.
Another replied, "Perhaps it wasn't meant for him at all," and the faint laughter that followed sounded forced, almost masking unease. Miss Marple observed the body language accompanying these remarks, the subtle shift of a shoulder, a tightening of fingers around a ribbon, the quick glance to see who was watching. The interplay suggested that more was at stake than the gifts themselves. Hidden motives and unspoken resentments seemed to ripple through each exchange. Even the children, usually delighted by the promise of small trinkets, noticed the tension. One youngster clutched a brightly wrapped parcel while looking curiously at a nearby adult who avoided meeting their gaze. Miss Marple's attention to these small details allowed her to trace connections that words alone might have obscured, revealing relationships, minor grievances, and subtle power dynamics among the villagers. By the time the exchange concluded, the cozy atmosphere of candlelight, laughter, and festive scents remained intact, but beneath it lay a layer of quiet intrigue. Miss Marple tucked these observations carefully into her mind, recognizing that these small discrepancies, the returned gifts, the awkward swaps, and the fleeting expressions, were pieces of a larger puzzle. In the rhythm of this simple holiday custom, the first threads of deeper secrets had revealed themselves, nudging her ever closer to the hidden truths of the evening. Chapter 5. The night deepens. Outside, the wind had begun to howl in earnest, whipping snow across the village streets and draping every rooftop in thick white blankets. The hall, with its sturdy stone walls and welcoming glow, now felt like an island amidst the winter storm. Villagers pressed closer to the fires, murmuring softly about the worsening weather, while the occasional gust rattled windows, reminding them that the world beyond was both cold and impassable. Miss Marple, however, saw opportunity in this enforced confinement. The snowbound night provided her with the perfect setting to observe, to piece together connections and subtle tensions that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. She moved quietly from room to room, noting the gentle clink of cups in the sitting area, the murmurs of conversation near the punch bowl, and the soft shuffle of feet across the polished floor. Each small interaction became a thread, revealing more about the villagers' hidden motives. Mr. Greaves lingered near the sideboard, offering assistance to anyone who approached, yet his eyes darted constantly toward Mrs. Pembroke, betraying a lingering irritation, perhaps an old grudge he had yet to reconcile. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the two, noticing how a wordless exchange, a slight nod, a subtle tightening of a hand, spoke volumes where speech failed. In the library, where shelves of books reflected the warm candlelight, other guests spoke in hushed tones. A pair of women leaned close, their voices nearly inaudible, yet their expressions suggested secrets that had persisted for years. Miss Marple took note of their gestures, the quick glance to see who might be listening, the deliberate lowering of voices that hinted at stories untold. The snowstorm outside created a sense of isolation, a temporary removal from the wider world, which seemed to embolden confessions, or at least near revelations. Among the villagers, even the children, wrapped in thick scarves and mittens, moved cautiously through the hall, occasionally pausing to peer curiously at the adults. Their innocent questions prompted careful, measured answers, yet the subtext was unmistakable. These small conversations, these fleeting interactions, were part of the puzzle Miss Marple quietly assembled.
Every word, every gesture,
every pause contributed to her understanding of relationships, rivalries, and unspoken debts that had long influenced the village's social fabric. As the storm intensified, shadows danced across the walls, thrown by flickering candles and the occasional lightning-like glare from the snow-laden windows. The cozy warmth inside contrasted sharply with the wild bluster outside, heightening the sense of suspense. Miss Marple noticed even the smallest indications of tension. A cup rattled slightly in nervous hands. A chair scraped too sharply against the floor. A laugh carried a shade of unease beneath its pleasant tone. These subtle signs, often overlooked, were invaluable clues, guiding her understanding of who might have reason to act against Mr. Hawthorne or to conceal knowledge of the previous night's events. By the time the villagers had settled near the fires once more, their movements quieter and voices softer against the snow's relentless rhythm, Miss Marple had already begun piecing together the intricate web of connections, past grievances and potential motives. The isolation imposed by the storm had not merely confined the villagers, it had revealed them in ways that only the most observant eye could appreciate. In this cozy hall, wrapped in warmth and candlelight, the night deepened both literally and figuratively, and with it, the mystery that Miss Marple was quietly unravelling. The hall's candles flickered gently, their flames casting long, wavering shadows across walls adorned with holly and garlands. The soft golden glow created an inviting warmth, yet those same dancing shadows concealed subtle movements and secret expressions that only a careful observer could discern. Miss Marple leaned slightly against a polished table, her eyes tracing the contrasts between spoken words and observed actions. noting every hesitation, every glance that lingered too long, every small inconsistency in tone or gesture. Across the room, Mrs. Pembroke recounted an incident from the previous week with an air of casual amusement, yet her fingers clutched the edge of her chair with quiet tension. Mr. Greaves nodded along, offering measured responses, though the set of his jaw suggested irritation beneath his polite agreement. A third guest, a young man with wide eyes and nervous hands, laughed at intervals that seemed slightly forced. Miss Marple catalogued these discrepancies in her mind, understanding that the truth often hid not in what was said, but in what went unspoken, in the slight mismatches between story and action. The flickering candlelight created pockets of shadow that occasionally revealed details otherwise unnoticed.
A small envelope slipped beneath a chair caught the edge of a flame, drawing Miss Marple's attention.
Its position suggested it had been dropped deliberately or perhaps forgotten in haste, yet the placement was curious enough to warrant consideration. Nearby, a spilled glass of mulled cider formed a tiny, dark puddle that reflected faces in a distorted manner, reminding her that perspective, like lighting, could obscure or illuminate intentions. Conversations continued in gentle waves, laughter blending with the soft creak of chairs and the occasional pop of a crackling log. Miss Marple moved subtly through the space, her observations threading together the patterns of behavior. One guest praised a dish enthusiastically, yet their eyes constantly flicked toward another table, betraying distraction or concealed concern. Another recounted a mundane anecdote with exaggerated gestures that failed to match the words themselves. Each mismatch, each tiny incongruity was a clue she quietly recorded, narrowing the circle of potential motives and suspects. Even the most innocuous actions, shifting weight from one foot to another, adjusting a scarf, lingering over a slice of fruitcake, told her stories. She noticed the rhythm of interactions, the brief exchange of glances between guests, and the slight tension in shoulders that suggested long-standing grievances or freshly stirred anxieties. The warm glow of the candles made the hall cozy, yet the shadows they cast carried secrets, hiding and revealing in equal measure. By the time the evening had deepened, Miss Marple had begun connecting the inconsistencies, aligning stories with observed actions, and quietly identifying which guests warranted closer attention. The cozy atmosphere of firelight and candlelit warmth remained intact, but beneath it, the subtle web of human behavior revealed its threads. In this interplay of shadow and light, warmth and curiosity, the clues were taking shape, guiding her toward the answers that lay just beyond the flickering glow. Chapter 6. Secrets Unravel. The grand Christmas tree stood tall in the center of the hall, its twinkling lights reflecting softly off polished ornaments, and the golden tinsel that spiraled around its branches. Miss Marple lingered nearby, her eyes quietly taking in the glow and the way it softened the edges of the hall while drawing attention to the small group of villagers gathering at its base. There was a hush in the air, as if the presence of the tree encouraged careful speech and gentle reflection, making it the perfect place for truths long hidden to surface. She invited a few of the key guests closer, encouraging conversation in low, unobtrusive tones. The warmth of the festive lights contrasted with the subtle tension threading through their expressions. A small confession emerged almost reluctantly from Mrs. Pembroke, whose voice was careful but carried a tremor of sincerity.
"I didn't tell anyone before," she admitted, glancing down at the tips of her gloves, "but I saw him arguing with Mr. Hawthorne last month."
Over something he should have known nothing about. Miss Marple's eyes, gentle yet probing, encouraged the quiet acknowledgement of truth. The other villagers exchanged brief, startled glances, yet none interrupted, sensing the careful unfolding of information. Miss Marple listened with patience, noting the subtle movements that accompanied the confession, a quick bite of the lip, the nervous crossing and uncrossing of hands, the fleeting eye contact with another guest. These small human gestures, she knew, were often more revealing than any words could be. The confession was but a thread, yet one that could unravel a larger pattern if followed carefully. Nearby, a young couple shifted uneasily, their hushed tones blending into the gentle rustle of tinsel and soft laughter from another corner of the room. Miss Marple observed how the warmth of the lights and the familiar holiday decorations seemed to coax out honesty, while also highlighting the contrasts in character, the hesitation, the fear of judgment, and the protective instincts that kept secrets alive until now. Even in a festive setting, human nature revealed itself in small, telling ways, and every gesture contributed to the growing understanding of hidden motives. The tree itself seemed to hold the scene together, its twinkling lights casting long shadows that alternated between concealment and revelation. Miss Marple noted how the confession, though brief, shifted the mood subtly, like a spark in the quiet night. It provided a glimpse of the tangled relationships and past grievances that had influenced the evening's events, offering both clarity and the promise of further discovery. The villagers, wrapped in the comforting glow, felt the tension of unspoken truths gently pressing against the cozy backdrop, a reminder that even in celebration, secrets were never far from the surface. By the time the small group had dispersed, Miss Marple had quietly absorbed each gesture, each pause, and each revelation. The lights continued to shimmer, reflecting softly on the polished floor, yet the undercurrent of tension persisted, interwoven with the warmth and charm of the holiday setting. She understood that this small confession, shared in the gentle glow of the Christmas tree, would be an essential piece in the puzzle she was patiently assembling, guiding her ever closer to the truth hidden within the village's familiar faces. Miss Marple sat quietly near the window, the snow continuing its soft, relentless descent beyond the glass. The hall's warmth, mingling with the glow of candles and the twinkle of the Christmas tree lights, created a cozy cocoon, yet her mind was far from calm. She began to trace the connections between the events of the evening, allowing each small detail to guide her thoughts. Footprints in the snow, some overlapping and others oddly angled, had long suggested movement that was purposeful and secretive. Now, in the quiet of this snowbound night, she began to see the pattern emerge. Her mind wandered back to the fragments of conversation she had overheard near the hearth. Words once easily dismissed now seemed charged with subtle significance. A nervous laugh here, a hesitant nod there, a glance exchanged that had gone unnoticed. All of these formed invisible threads linking individuals in ways not immediately apparent. Miss Marple's practiced eyes saw that these moments were far from random. Each whisper and gesture carried the weight of hidden intentions. Then there was the torn note, still partially legible, its contents hinting at a grievance and a secret meeting. Previously, it had seemed an isolated clue, a fragment of a puzzle too incomplete to yield much. But now, as she mentally overlaid it with the footprints, the interactions, and the inconsistencies she had observed at the dinner table and during the gift exchange, a subtle outline began to emerge. The note's jagged edges matched the hurried movements reflected in the tracks outside, and the smudged ink mirrored the nervous fingerprints she had glimpsed on the envelope earlier. The realization struck her gently, like the first clear light of dawn. The incidents of the evening were not isolated, but part of a carefully concealed sequence, designed to mislead and distract. Miss Marple's attention returned to the villagers still lingering in the hall. Each had been present in key moments, each had acted in ways that now appeared less innocent than they had seemed in the warmth of candlelight. The small inconsistencies, the returned gifts, the awkward exchanges, the careful choice of words, suddenly carried coherent weight. A subtle pattern of behavior emerged, and she could see the alignment of motives forming around the central question: who stood to gain from Mr. Hawthorne's sudden collapse? Her thoughts moved like a delicate loom, weaving together the threads of observation, whispered fears, and small overlooked gestures. The snow outside, silent and undisturbed in places, had recorded the movement of the night, while the voices within the hall had recorded human emotions in ways more intricate than any written note could capture. As she pieced these elements together, Miss Marple felt the thrill of recognition. This was the point where insight began to clarify, where the scattered pieces of the puzzle whispered their secrets without revealing the final solution. The warmth of the room, the comforting hum of conversation, and the soft glow of the candles provided a gentle contrast to the intensity of her deductions. She realized that the truth was near, balanced delicately between what had been revealed and what remained hidden. The footprints, the whispers, and the torn note, all were threads in a tapestry of motive and opportunity, and she could now see the faint outlines of the design they formed. The sudden realization filled her with quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that the evening's mystery still demanded patience and careful observation before the final answer could emerge. Chapter 7. The Culprit Revealed. Miss Marple stood near the center of the hall, the warm glow of candlelight reflecting softly on polished floors and the tinsel-draped banisters. The villagers gathered around, drawn by her quiet invitation, each face a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and polite expectation. The snow outside had slowed to a gentle whisper, muffling the world beyond, leaving the hall as a cozy, isolated stage upon which the evening's drama would unfold. Miss Marple's calm presence provided an anchor, a soft reassurance that despite the tension, nothing about the gathering was meant to alarm. She began to speak in her gentle, deliberate voice, weaving her observations into a narrative that invited attention without confrontation. "We have had an evening full of surprises," she began, her eyes sweeping the room. Footprints in the snow, whispers in quiet corners, and notes that were never meant to be seen. All have left traces of intentions, hidden or otherwise. The villagers shifted slightly, some leaning in, others clutching cups of warming tea, their collective curiosity heightened by the rhythm of her speech. Miss Marple paused to observe reactions, noting subtle shifts in posture and fleeting expressions. Mr. Greaves's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Mrs. Pembroke's fingers twitched over the edge of her handkerchief. Each micro-gesture was a clue, a thread to be carefully followed. She allowed these observations to simmer in silence, giving the room's natural warmth time to soothe the growing tension, while the psychological undercurrents became more apparent. Then, almost casually, she addressed the group with a quiet certainty. "It is often the smallest inconsistencies that reveal the truth," she said. "The gestures that do not match words, the fleeting glances, the hurried movements. They have all spoken, even when words have not." Her gaze settled briefly on the person whose posture had betrayed the greatest unease throughout the evening. The room seemed to hush collectively, the crackle of the fire and the soft murmur of the wind outside fading into near silence as attention turned inward. Toward the unfolding realization, Miss Marple continued, drawing together the strands of observation she had carefully gathered over the past days. She recounted the sequence of events, each minor clue now aligned with others, each gesture and whisper gaining significance. Her calm, methodical explanation left little room for argument, but instead encouraged reflection. Slowly, she revealed the one person whose movements, reactions, and secretive glances formed a pattern that could not be explained by accident or misunderstanding. The room remained warm, filled with festive scents and candlelight. Yet beneath the cozy atmosphere, the tension had shifted to clarity. The guilty party, confronted by the quiet power of careful deduction, acknowledged the truth in soft, resigned tones. Relief rippled through the hall, not only at the resolution of the mystery, but also at the preservation of the calm, gentle environment in which it had been discovered. Miss Marple's eyes, serene and knowing, swept across the villagers once more, the holiday lights reflecting softly in her gaze, reminding all that even amid secrets and suspense, warmth and composure could endure. Miss Marple shifted her attention slightly, her voice calm yet deliberate. drawing the villagers' focus to the intricate web of events that had led to the evening's unsettling incident. "Now that we have identified the person responsible," she began, "it is only right to understand why and how this came to pass." She gestured gently toward the footprints in the snow, the torn note, and the subtle gestures she had observed earlier, allowing the details to come into collective awareness without breaking the cozy warmth of the hall. "The footprints outside," she continued, "told us more than mere movement. Notice how some overlapped, while others were retraced. This was no careless wandering. The person responsible made deliberate choices, returning to certain spots, pausing, and concealing evidence where possible. Each step was a small story in itself, a silent reflection of intention and caution." She paused, letting her words settle into the minds of the listeners, some of whom nodded quietly, connecting what they had seen to her careful observations. Turning to the torn note, Miss Marple's eyes softened with a mixture of clarity and empathy. "And this fragment," she said, holding it delicately, "was not simply misplaced. It was partially destroyed to hide its message, a message that revealed a grievance and a financial dispute. The individual feared discovery, yet the fragments, combined with our observations of subtle glances and hesitations during the evening, allowed us to reconstruct the underlying truth." She explained how small details, the uneven smudges, the hastily folded corners, spoke volumes about the urgency and secrecy of the act. Miss Marple then described how gestures, whispers, and even the pattern of seating at the table contributed to the understanding of motive. The exchanges during the gift swap, the returned packages, and the brief tensions around the dinner table all pointed to concealed emotions, envy, frustration, and the desire to manipulate perception. These seemingly minor actions were, in fact, key indicators, revealing a chain of intent that would otherwise have remained invisible. She allowed the villagers to consider how the smallest actions had been quietly signaling a larger truth, encouraging a sense of discovery without judgment. Finally, she summarized the method, gentle but precise. The individual acted with a combination of opportunity and subtlety, relying on the social rhythms of the evening and the natural distractions of festive cheer. The act itself was sudden yet carefully masked, allowing the rest of us to perceive only fragments until the pattern became clear. It is the patience to observe, the awareness of small inconsistencies, and the understanding of human nature that has allowed us to reach clarity. The villagers listened intently, expressions shifting from confusion to realization, some murmuring quietly in agreement. The warmth of the hall, the flickering candlelight, the soft laughter of children, and the comforting aroma of festive treats remained undisturbed, even as the intellectual puzzle resolved itself. Each piece of evidence, every minor gesture and whispered word had found its place, creating a sense of satisfaction and understanding. Miss Marple's explanation left no doubt. The mystery was unravelled, yet the charm and comfort of the evening endured, reminding all that truth could emerge gently, without disturbing the cozy bonds of a community gathered in warmth and light. Chapter 8. Restoration and Reflection. Morning light filtered softly through frost-covered windows, casting a gentle glow across the hall that had been the centre of so much intrigue the night before. Outside, the snow lay untouched, sparkling like sugar beneath the pale sun, while inside, the villagers moved with a renewed sense of calm. The fires still crackled, sending warmth and a subtle scent of pine into the air, and the polished floors reflected the cheerful glow of garlands and ornaments that had survived the previous evening's tension. Guests wandered among the decorations, their eyes bright with appreciation. Children pointed out their favorite baubles, and laughter rang lightly through the hall, a pleasant contrast to the hushed whispers of suspicion that had filled the rooms just hours earlier. The carolers returned to their usual corner, voices blending in gentle harmonies that filled the space with festive cheer. Even those who had been most involved in the evening's mysteries smiled with a soft relief, their interactions now relaxed, free from the undercurrent of unease that had momentarily shadowed the gathering. Miss Marple, moved quietly among them, noting how subtle gestures of kindness had returned naturally to the villagers. A hand placed on a shoulder, a gentle word of encouragement, a shared glance of understanding. All of these small actions carried more meaning than any dramatic declaration. She observed how harmony was restored not through force or confrontation, but through the patient unfolding of truth, the acknowledgement of small errors, and the quiet forgiveness that followed human imperfection. In this gentle routine, the essence of the community shone clearly, reminding her of the resilience and decency that often lay beneath the surface of ordinary life. As she paused near the grand Christmas tree, its lights shimmering softly, Miss Marple allowed herself a quiet reflection. People carried secrets, she thought, as natural as the turning of the seasons, and each individual's hidden stories shaped the patterns of their lives. Yet the warmth of shared moments, the laughter, the care, the willingness to listen, could soften the weight of those secrets. Human nature was a complex tapestry, she mused, woven with threads of both curiosity and compassion, ambition and humility, mischief and generosity. The villagers, busy with preparations for a modest feast and the continuation of holiday traditions, seemed unaware of the subtle philosophical currents flowing through Miss Marple's thoughts. Yet the peace in the hall, the renewed laughter, and the sense of shared celebration reflected the restoration she quietly celebrated in her mind. The events of the previous night had tested the bonds of the community, but they had emerged stronger, tempered by understanding and the gentle glow of human kindness. With a soft smile, Miss Marple allowed herself to relax, content in the knowledge that the mystery had been resolved and that the village's holiday spirit remained intact. The warmth of the hall, the shimmering lights, and the subtle harmony of voices reminded her, and the villagers, that even amid hidden secrets and quiet intrigue, peace and goodwill could endure, wrapping every heart in a comforting, enduring embrace. The hall buzzed with gentle laughter as villagers gathered around the long, polished tables, plates heaped with warm pies, roasted vegetables and slices of rich fruitcake. The tension of the previous nights seemed almost like a distant memory, replaced now with light-hearted teasing and cheerful stories. Miss Marple moved among them quietly, savouring the simple joy of restored community, her eyes observing the subtle ways in which people relaxed into one another's presence, smiles soft and voices warm. Children chased one another under the boughs of holly and the twinkle of fairy lights, giggling as they accidentally bumped into chairs or tipped a small bowl of nuts. Adults shook their heads in mock exasperation, but laughter quickly followed, the room filled with the comforting hum of voices harmonizing with the occasional crackle from the fires. Small misunderstandings from the mystery, an incorrectly returned gift, an overheard snippet of conversation, became the source of amusement rather than anxiety, providing stories that would be recounted with chuckles for many seasons to come. Miss Marple paused near a group sharing a particularly humorous recollection. One guest mimicked the overly dramatic way another had reacted to the torn note, causing everyone nearby to erupt in quiet laughter. Another recounted the awkward exchange of footprints in the snow, exaggerating each step for effect. Even those who had been most involved in the tension of recent events joined in, their smiles genuine, their shoulders eased. The hall's warmth and the twinkle of candles lent the scene a cozy, almost storybook quality, reinforcing the comforting sense that the mystery had resolved without leaving lingering discord. Amid the laughter and shared stories, Miss Marple allowed herself a reflective smile. Curiosity, she thought, was a gentle and necessary thing, guiding us toward understanding while reminding us to observe carefully and think kindly. Each twist of the mystery, each subtle observation, had revealed more about human nature than about wrongdoing alone. The villagers had shown patience, honesty, and even humor in navigating the puzzle, demonstrating that community was not merely a collection of individuals, but a network of shared experiences. small joys and moments of understanding. As the evening drew on, conversation softened into gentle murmurs. Plates were cleared, and mugs of spiced tea were refilled. Miss Marple, seated near the warm fire, let the laughter fade into a comfortable quiet. She considered how the mystery had reminded everyone of the small pleasures of life: shared food, stories that sparked smiles, the comfort of friends and neighbors, and the satisfaction of seeing curiosity guide discovery without diminishing warmth. In that gentle stillness, she felt certain that the village's bonds had grown stronger, wrapped not only in festive lights and cozy fires, but in the quiet understanding that every heart carried a story, and that kindness and observation could illuminate even the smallest corners of life. With a soft nod, she allowed herself one final glance at the hall, now filled with contented faces and gentle laughter. The mysteries of the past days had passed, replaced with warmth, harmony, and the quiet joy of community, leaving a gentle reminder that even in the midst of curiosity and intrigue, life's simplest pleasures could shine brightest.